Welcome to Trapped Inside There. By Robert Lopez. Chapter 1, Patrol. Has a wish ever come true? Blinding darkness made it concerned with sight, touch, and thinking something and nothing at once. Importance of keeping sanity, and giving what life had to offer. Falling into a mindset and hungering the thoughts of letting go. I never meant to exist and the majority of it seemed wrong. Floating senselessly down a river of mixed emotions, drowning out sounds. I would wonder why both good and bad parts of my subconscious touched me simultaneously. I clench my hands and form a tight grip in my palms. Mostly everything feels rotten and filled with decay. I yearn for a better purpose. Love might benefit, thinking back hard, still remembering, wrong can be undone. Neglect will go unseen. My vision focused, and my eyes sort of hurt. I wanted nothing more than to make life worth more meaning. Everything must have a point to my life. The pressure of this transfusion, I smiled and leaned oblique toward its defining counterparts laid loosely. I tried to submit against the detachment between an object and myself. I wanted to find balance, but the object and I felt more right and stuck with ideas to lose sense of understanding. Material controls my life and the amount of importance, so I grinned. In the heat of the moment, my eyes twitched around the square-shaped figure room. Staying inside this room any longer might make me nauseous, so I instinctively pulled myself out of my trance. Movement felt wrong, too much thought about the basic functions of the human body, anxiety, and muscle weakness took effect. Changing my clothes felt nice. I've never felt like going without proper attire. Never felt alone inside. Following a pack of troubled members that shared a common interest must have been a rarity. These best friends of mine are Logan, Pablo, Trek, and Tanner. Logan hasn't been much of anyone or anything that I know of. I haven't known him for that long, but while our partnership seems short, our trust has tightened. Pablo hasn't seemed to want to do much of anything, especially team up. The only reason he designs images for us is because of his family ties with Trek. Trek defines forward thinking and is one damn good teammate. She's in charge of this organization that we've invented for these past couple years of our meaningless lives. Tanner would be considered a poltergeist. He disappears and reappears without acknowledgement of ever leaving. My team likes to play, and when we're hot, we win. I remember a trip out of nowhere and taking in sweet feels and aromas of better times. Walking primary is the best way of getting around. I grab my jacket before walking outside my door. It's dark. Time isn't running away, I am. The nights are normal. Only light in the night is the moon and my eyes are already accommodated. This side of town is my own. I have grown up here. I suck every last drop of blood out of this place. I respect responsibility and enjoy it more like that. Having to care and maintain it, it's life. Moving hasn't been too troubling and I especially do it well. The night isn't the best place to be after dark. Rapists, murderers, thieves, and anyone that means to do you harm walk around this hour. Defending myself hasn't been an issue. My team and I have kept the ruckus down, for the most part. I walked to our meeting, which is about a block away. I reached the school without any problems, thankfully. The walk is very low-key. Travel by foot has never been too difficult. This path has never caused me any trouble. Jobs take my perspective of being complicated and replace them with meaning. I still have youth and I still have much life to live. I am unbelievably good at getting in and out of the worst possible situations. I wouldn't say theft is a positive or glamorous occupation. I wouldn't mind becoming something more of a law enforcer. As my talents assist me through worst-case scenarios, my eyes can virtually see possible outcomes before they happen. Following the rules hasn't been my strong suit, but benefiting out of taking advantage of the right circumstance had been. When I was young, I used to rob different stores throughout our little suburb. I changed as years had gone by and became a decent thief in the making. Time has advanced and I've seen no other potential alternative in obtaining what I desire. Positioning myself to spiral out of control is common. I don't try to deprive myself of normal. Never panic and keep posture. Usually I steal common and basic things. I keep in mind a checklist. While that's my life, my crew's gotta eat. They're into larger incomes and setting fires, giving no consideration of letting the flame die out. Ransacking buildings typically that don't deal with much human activity. Mindfully aware of the technology transition and a huge part of infiltrating by surpassing tech companies. Tech security systems has a major part of disaster liability, especially when wrong things happen for burglars. My opinion, on the other hand, has found it a little less stressful and found easier ways bypassing outdated technology. In other cases, some tech companies and their security systems have become more sadistic, literally allowing their games to take it so far as in fighting for their lives. More major systems allow the victims to gamble with their life with means of escaping. It would be hard to not pay attention to these high corporate organizations and not expect them to protect their supply. The tech that fills them with security and allows them to be a little more confident has altered viewership on most television channels. Fighting for your last breath or watching being crisped by a microwaved elevator has given the consumer more than they can chew. Not many people do what I do, and these companies give them every reason not to. Companies of technology and security have rolled into the market by monopolizing companies in partnerships and investments, turning their traps into powerhouses. Nevertheless, the race of selling products with higher demand. The control of the market has given authority more comfort zone. As most businesses that can afford these systems, it is more rewarding to have it and earn viewership apart from just having to rely on investigation. The traps are designed to trap, detain, or even kill you. The game and the challenges don't revolve around whom you are stealing from. It'll be advertised as a part of a solution that we take full responsibility in the safety of your company and our viewers. I take whatever gives me the upper edge in doing nothing, and my motivation is blissful. The steeper the edges, the more rewarding the grab. Everything's on high demand since the poor stay poor and the rich keep getting richer. Since it is legal to kill people, to have a license to kill, everything has been more directed towards spending. This world took materialism into another meaning. As for most people, they make the most of money, and others give the system something to chew up and spit back out. The tricks aren't something easily recognizable and could easily be overlooked. Typically, seeing isn't always reality. Traps are in favor of businesses. They sell contracts to companies that sell products for a system imposer to lure thieves into being apprehended. Companies then take those caught and sell them for rewards to the authorities or watch them be butchered all over television. The closest time I had ever been caught was while I had gone through my first heist with a corporate-owned jeweler that customized wrist watches. I had not known anything about the situation and wrist watches. My friend and fellow business partner Trek tells me they are a part of the best of business and have been doing nothing much better since ever. The consumer demand in fashion consumerism has skyrocketed, and the growth for the past 5 years has risen 3%. Its fashion is what drives consumers to buy. The warehouse was on the outside of town, so approaching the place wasn't easy. Human security has never been a problem. I navigated to the best place of entrance. Breaking and entering isn't in wire cutters or bolt cutters. These locations are always censored and alarmed by triggering an artificial computer that is programmed inside the security system. Usually everything is operated inside. The best way is to blend into the environment, but locations lay barren. From cardboard boxes to lamp posts. Nothing was ever easy. While tech isn't on my side, my ability to make something look stupid is. First, the computer picks up motion and judges whether it's a threat or not. In my case, having the authorities being called is the least of my problems. It's always not a bad idea to back out if it gets too heated. I found rolling a marble worked the best. The colors and the smoothness of the ball reflects any light that shines on its surface. The cameras pick up movement and focus attention away from a particular terrain. As sensors go, the beams of lights tend to cover more of the distracted area. While the heat of the light usually is hot enough to feel, the amount and the speed of movement isn't something you second guess while running through lasers. I reflect the light as a method to bypass any trips that I quickly run through. Usually down and away from where it points. I use a plastic reflector that is cheap and works effectively. The mirror is the size of a shield and fits on my arm like armor. It is easily stored or disposed of if necessary. The lights zip off the ceiling and are directed straight down towards the floor. I haven't any trouble bypassing lights, and I lose sense of worry once I approach the edge. The doors or windows are usually built out of affordable material, never boarded, and always enough to shine light in on any circumstance. Peering in the facilities seem to be standard and clean. Not new, but has been used and assembled to keep functional. I would have to be mindful of the glass. Doors have always been large enough to withstand the weight of a person trying to break through. Windows have been made to fill light to shine down on the floor. Maybe that is just the irony with natural light that helps manage being inside. I wouldn't say I'm the best at breaking glass, that's what scribes are for. The sensors don't worry about noise, which is definitely a plus. Any little trap or sound being carried over, false alarms are not acceptable with security systems. They do not shy away from using all sorts of different kinds of motion picker-uppers. Breaking the glass doesn't draw any attention. I duck inside. Everything seems normal. There are a few cameras and trip alarms. The lights flicker on because of motion sensors. Ironically, I never pay close attention to outdated lights. Getting into the corporate office was a breeze and bagged everything that seemed valuable. I wasn't surprised by the large amount of treasure. I slipped back in the same direction I had come in. The little broken glass in the window frame was shut and locked from the inside. This sent me into high alert. Nothing was triggered, unless the glass had been meant to alarm when broken into. A shock coursed through my body when the lights went out. I began to panic in the thought of the crime I had just committed. How much time was going to be served for this shit? A monitor flickered on. It sent a blaze of light throughout the entire building. Sense of urgency and panic flew across my face, and I knew the type of program the building was controlled over. It had been the handiwork of the off-day Z. They were said to make mercy feel like a joke. I remember seeing an advertisement on TV.
Settling down for vacation is usually the hardest. We only hope we give them a good rest and give them what their money is buying. Being caught for the crimes doesn't mean that they take a toll for what they have done. Usually they are back to their old ways after a few days.
I don't hesitate to run. It's a mind game and I wasn't going to play. I felt around for the first object that felt light enough to throw and heavy enough to break hardware. I managed not to fall and scurry away before any alarms or sirens screaming at me. There isn't any shame in leaving here with the cops. The voices in my mind played games and made me drowsy. Something is big and my strength is enough to hurt. Pain shoots through my neck as I struggle to find a way out. I'm in pain and I want its jabs to retire. The sweat that's beating down my forehead feels cool. I start to control by breathing. I imagine walking outside and hitting the road before the sun comes up. I felt good. I just had to focus. It makes me feel good to imagine not being in this position. I thirst for a way out. I imagine a door. I walk through the shallow hallway and start to watch as its parallel walls shine a light at the end of it. The hall feels alive. Its pattern is separate from mine and it flips me upside down. A ball falls down out of the air and bursts open like a piñata. Under the rummage of material, I spot a piece of paper containing a message. It seems to lay out nothing I don't already know. I burst in a sprint away from this spot and looked around. I find a fire exit door and try my hardest to bust it open. No use. I take another few steps back and look around in both directions. I noticed a door with flashing lights. The smell that resonated decaying flesh. I don't hesitate to go in. Spliced down the center of the wall had human blood and flies swarming around the room. My eyes widened and I thought of the worst possible outcome. A speaker that was built into the wall started to play gentle music. A lullaby a mom would sing to help a baby fall asleep. I stumble inside and glance back where I entered. Blood splattered the top. Under all its running red, I noticed a vent. Assuming it was a ventilation system, I grabbed a chair and stepped on it slowly. I slipped it off without any issue. The way ventilation systems worked usually meant a path out. Hoping the vent channeled throughout the entire facility, I don't hesitate to climb in. The ventilators seemed to branch two pathways, one being inside and outside. I fell and hit the ground hard. I pulled myself off the ground slowly. There hadn't been enough pain to stop me from turning my pace from a walk to a jog. I had broken out whether they wanted me to or not. Pablo met me outside a few yards away from the building.
"You don't seem too confident, Ace,"
Pablo said. I looked at him without saying anything, but acknowledged him. Still seems pretty quiet for the most part, saying while breathing out. I had tripped it. I burst out while tossing him the bag filled with watches and loot.
"By who?"
"Off Daisy, I believe." My response was. He stared at me. He didn't have anything interesting to say, so he said,
"That's fucked up. Want to get out of here?"
It was as if they wanted me to escape, I muttered. Off Daisy does things like this. They play with your mind and hope to break it. They will leave you in the dark with only a match. They could also lead a path without conflict. Will to survive. Some people have it and others might have already given up. Pablo said nothing. I thought I was in trouble, but didn't care. I'd wanted to complain, but Pablo wasn't that sort of guy to understand. We started to walk away from the scene. Chapter 2, Fixed Income. I made it to the school without any trouble. I slipped through a fence in the back. It was a typical rundown school and had everything torn up and packed away. Swing sets, monkey bars, and teeter-totters without the proper care. I wouldn't trust them. I swung the back door open and maneuvered through debris around the hallway. I walked past 3 classrooms before reaching my colleagues. Everyone's here except Tanner. I verbally acknowledge that everything's been going as it should be. I am ready to start this briefing whenever. We usually started with or without Tanner. Trek starts laying a project down about a building that sells everything conveniently. Clothing and shoes. Food and kitchen sets. The location was considered a general store of all sorts. These establishments have been the buck builder of anything and everything. Crashing small businesses for the past century.
The amount of product is set up for holiday buying. We want to walk into this location stocked for this upcoming year,
she says slyfully. What about the infiltration system? I ask.
From my understanding, we are coming in while it undergoes renovation.
She smiled.
I understand that the date went into effect last week and was set up before sales go in effect, which starts next week.
My eyes glanced up to notice everyone looking as if they never committed a crime before. Everyone was in on the heists as much as I was. Trek gave the orders and was practically the brains behind the entire operation. Ace and I did the dirty work. Stealing, breaking and entering, lock-picking, and running through highly intellectual killing robots. Pablo was a mad wizard at figuring out drawing schematics for the ins and outs of our heist. Tanner would do what I would call asking questions and getting intel. Talking to customers, bribing workers, slipping in on tours, and starting trouble for exclusive break-ins. Logan was a thief too, couldn't steal anything valuable without getting in trouble, but he stole. He served a few sentences and came out a thief time in and time again. He's a helping hand more than anything. With everyone playing their part, we shouldn't run into any trouble. We should stop and work out a strategy on the inside, I informed.
The hardest part, to my understanding, is getting in.
She figured. I shook my head. It's a learning experience that comes with time. From the pressure that is induced with cameras that have no hesitation, I mentioned. Pablo coughed, then interrupted.
The most we'll have to worry about is personnel. We don't have to worry about any alarms. But we'll have to worry about alarms being triggered if someone is working. I wouldn't worry about what we steal, but in which manner we do it.
We are better off taking the best,
Tanner said quickly.
I like the best of the best. No problem in spoiling yourself already committing the crime. A taste of the supply is all worthwhile.
He couldn't help but laugh.
We are looking to expand our business and how we operate. We need a little more than just a marble collection and shield.
Trek openly said to me.
We will need suits, rope, night vision cameras, gloves, flashlights, and as many navigation tools as we can paw.
I never can seem to escape this life. I feel that I'm dealing with crime to grow a career out of survival. When? I asked. Trek looked into my eyes and said.
2 days.
I imagine us being some sort of laid-back no-good-lookers that never have anything better to do, I said, taking another sip of my cooler.
The long run will keep us achieving. Walking into a bank, guns blazing, isn't the best way of moving up,
Pablo said. I would love to be in the opposite position, enforcing the law where law needs to be visible, rather than on a long shot, I said.
It's not even that bad.
Logan said.
You find out real fast it's worth trying to be a criminal. I've stolen, my mama stole, my papa stole, my cousin stole, my sister stole, no regret.
He laughed. Trek spotted us on the playground.
How have you been holding up?
She touched my arm. Good, I blinked.
Anything giving you second thoughts on being a part of our cause?
She asked. I kindly said, no. I was just mentioning that it would be nice to be on the other end of the stick for a change. Who knows us anything, and we don't know anyone. I imagine being better situated by this time anyhow, I said discreetly.
Never mind all that,
she said.
Hoping to never compromise and do hard time for less you're worth,
Tanner said, looking over to us. Tanner ran his fingers through his hair and told us that he is having a bad feeling about all of this.
When I'm about to go through something that turns out wrong, I disappear. I used to live in another town, and I would have these bad feelings of losing what is close to me. I took off without a second's notice and it saved my life. It turned out our town had been shot up by a large gang that was dealing drugs through our streets. I talked to my family later that week and told me about my place being shot up. I had blood coursing through those streets, but I followed my gut,
he said.
Sometimes everything has a reason of happening with or without you understanding. Either way, the choice was yours.
Trek slipped in.
But much of what I feel now is how I felt then,
Tanner replied.
Hope you're wrong.
She shot back. Tanner didn't say anything else.
We should all rest and take it easy tomorrow,
Trek said. On my way home I decided to stop at my parents' grave to give my respect. A stroll through the neighborhood would be perfect on a night like this. It'll be good to see them again. The sun will be coming up in about an hour. It'll be nice to stop and say a few words. Between the school and home there is the cemetery. My parents are buried there. I found that it wasn't difficult to live on my own. Both of them died when I was very young. My age didn't matter, but I was always traveling with them, it seemed. They took me to see different parts of the world. My father was very wealthy and my mother was very beautiful. I had no siblings, which left me very spoiled. I bonded very well with my biological parents. My parents never neglected me or what I wanted. They always used words of encouragement, like, "Good job, buddy, and you're doing just fine, sweetheart." My father told me to never let this world abuse me. That I should use my head and nothing was impossible to escape. Mostly, I've taken his advice and regretted nothing. My mother, on the other hand, made everything serve a purpose. The way I talked, dressed, and took care of myself. I imagine never losing them. I turned an age that might be considered old enough. Either way, I was on my own. My father served as a professional bodyguard. He took care of anyone that might need his services and had been honorably discharged. He got married and had me. An impressive guy, all sorts of medals of valor. The guy practically could do anything he wanted. People noticed him. People wanted to use him as a hired gun because of his talents. He never refused the money. While we had gotten ready to leave on our trip out of state, gangsters confronted us outside. I remember sitting in the back of the car as my mother said,
"We should have let them know before we packed everything."
My father replied with,
"They wouldn't even try."
We had not been in a hurry, but in the particular moment of departure bullets flew into the windshield and hit my mother right into the chest a few times. Stunned, my father swerved and floored the gas. We took a right and managed to slip in and out of sight down the street. I can remember my father yelling,
"We'll be fine now that we..."
Suddenly a SUV swooped in and smashed our car from my father's side. I vaguely remember the incident and shortly passed out after. I woke up with my mother screaming as she was about to die. A bullet ripped through my father's head. I listened to these men as they joked about my mother and that I had suffered too much head trauma to survive the crash. Suddenly I heard a crack and the scream fell silent. They had broken my mother's neck and I lay in the back unable to move. They had stomped on the back of her neck in the middle of the day. No one had done anything and I started to cry. I had a concussion and some fractured ribs. That was the last time that I'd see my parents. I felt worthless and these men disrespected everything we had, our name, our money, our life. Only recently had I found the reason they put a hit on my father's head. Turns out my father was helping a man named Phil Macer. Mr. Macer hired my father to kill his brother for money embezzlement. Keith Macer had been killed for misused funds and been stealing money from his brother. Turns out who he had been married to, Sheila Macer, had hired a hit on the man that killed her husband. As for Phil, he was shot down on a yacht 4 years later. All this information was in the paper. All written by a female reporter named Jin Ho. I said my goodbyes and asked them for a little luck. My mind is consumed by darkness. Every day seems recurring and all else doesn't serve a purpose. Each cut blade of grass blows in the wind and a chill runs up my spine. The planet seems bare, cold despair haunts my mind in the chill air. An invisible string puppeting man. My insides turn and my hunger starts to control my lust for power. This life can be fixed with the power of initiative and I have the motivation to make this heist go the way I want. I make it back before sunrise. The mildew fills all the yard because the sun hasn't yet come up. I soak my feet with each step I take. The birds chirp as I slam my door, shutting the remaining glimmering light left by the unwanted rotation of the earth. I grab something to eat and sit back on my stolen couch and watch my stolen television. The news is out of control, from riots, prison breaks, war, and murders in the street. It's never been better to be a thief. Chapter 3, Diamond in the Rough. The day started off uneasy. First, I woke up early and I tried to fall asleep again. I lay in bed for an hour, then grabbed something to drink and lay back down. I think back and realize I haven't learned anything about this location. Hesitant about what Trek was planning and I had been that way since the beginning. The initial idea was, I would be able to sneak out of our pack to steal something valuable enough to give me enough money to get out. I jumped on the web. I looked up Unmeet on the internet. They have a specific website for everything and even online orders for deliveries. I look closer and squint. How can you conveniently order anything with just a click of a button? I come to the page of all the new deals and exciting promotions that are being offered. Special event appears on the top left corner with a counter saying 5 days before doorbusters. I look at the clock and notice I have to meet my crew in 2 hours. I scroll for about 10 to 15 minutes and find a gem. I found a diamond that is 5 carats and worth $100,000. In the night, the diamond is stashed in a safe location somewhere that I would have to mischievously locate using Pablo's blueprints. In stores I've seen where they have jewelry sets in the displays to draw the eyes of onlookers. All to be able to sell decent jewels for a reasonable price. Wedding rings and necklaces, for example. I looked past all of it and found the biggest and baddest rock in the joint. I'll find it behind a locked door. In any case, cracking a safe with an alloy of iron and carbon generally needs to be cracked by a powerful drill. If anyone would know anything about this kind of thing, it would be Logan. Without hesitation, I called Logan. He answers with a belch, then a
hello.
I tell him about all my ideas, explaining to him how I'm in need of a different point of view. I also told him I would cut him in 75-25. All I would need to do is separate each of us from the pack and find us a locked safe. If I could just see the schematics from Pablo before we go into the place, I'm sure I would be able to pinpoint the room instantly. Logan tells me he's in and hangs up first. I sit back and kick my feet up on the desk. I think hard about it. And then there were only two. I dislike pain, not enjoying any of it. I don't want to say I'm overdoing myself, but I don't want to jump into anything without thinking. Never stop until I get what I want. Anxiety flushes my face and I begin to grow eerie without enough sleep. I stomach all of my stress, yet, my temperature rises and I start to feel faint. The feelings all feel foreign. I draw in a deep breath and hold it. It's out of my control. I hope that I hold up on my own. This world doesn't owe anybody anything. I think to myself. The harder I try, most likely it'll be mine. Feeling soft becomes hard. Never neglect my care and never phase out of existence. I step hard and I feel a nail stake my foot. Staring becomes unrealistic and looking back on everything feels more real. My leg goes numb and I'm sure this is real. I'm hopeless. I walk outside in the dark, it's chillier than usual and I smile. I like it when it's cold. The cemetery sends everything rushing back to my head again. I just stare at the ground as I pass it. My gang is hanging outside the school. We exchange glances, then jump into the wagon. We speed down a few blocks coming into city limits. I look around and see faces that are smiling. A storm seems to be creeping in. They don't seem to notice anything wrong with the integrity of stealing. I'm a hypocrite, aiming largely to bounce out of my life to become like them. Mindlessly unprivileged with what they already have. I'm an author that writes little stories about each little person we drive past. I am justice and I serve them as I see fit. I turn to Tanner, who is driving. We pass city limits and drive out for a couple of minutes and pull in at a gas station. We park behind a poorly lit back alley. We all get out.
When was the last time we all went out on a job together? It almost brings a tear to my eye,
Pablo says. Tanner looked at him and smiled. Logan didn't even pay attention and walked further away from our group.
We need to hurry and get situated. Everyone grab their gear and saddle up for the hike.
I'm totally glad you guys decided to join me on this one. I was starting to think I was your lapdog. I laughed.
As long as we come out the same as we go in, then I don't have any issue with us ransacking us some suckers,
Trek said cleverly. At least you're being optimistic about the situation, I said.
I'm sure we'll be successful in this engagement. We work together and watch each other's back as if you were watching your own,
she said.
She's easy with you.
Pablo nudged my shoulder.
She loves playing music and follows all the popular bands that name themselves after famous kinds of breakfast food. Sizzle bacon, over easy, sausage links, OJ, and hash browns,
he mentioned.
I follow all sorts of music, not the ones that sound like breakfast food. Links to Savageness, the band's name was called, not Sausage Links,
she said. We arrived at the store and could easily be mistaken for a mall. The biggest goddamn place that sold the type of shit you've ever wanted. I almost laughed and stared at the place for a few seconds before realizing everyone was already moving ahead of me. Clouds were now rolling over top and you could feel a light sprinkle. We walked to the side of the building and climbed up the siding, which had a ladder. A balcony lay on the edge and was made specifically for employees to engage in conversation while smoking tobacco. I assumed that helped them feel good to relieve themselves from all those customers. Instead of breaking any glass, we could just bust the lock on the door that had been the break room for all the employees. Bobby pins worked wonders in this situation and had been indispensable. We hustled through the door and bust open any that were in our way. I slipped past any cameras and took a look for anyone that might be around. Every room had a different design, each room rewarded an employee for their hard work and achievements. "Nobody's here," I said to everyone.
0500 and anyone will arrive for work. We can manage to take everything we need in the next 2 hours and still have 6 hours before anyone arrives.
Informed by Trek. Tanner seemed to be missing. Logan and Pablo looked at us waiting to be directed. I asked Pablo for the map and if that I could use it. I exchanged glances with Logan without Tanner noticing. He willingly said yes and handed me the blueprints. "I will grab liners, clothing, bags, and anything that might seem useful," I said. "Pablo, grab anything that might be important to your gear and handle any traps for protection," I demanded. He nodded and took off around the corner. "Trek, see if you can manage to break in the gun cage," I told her. She followed after Pablo. "Logan, I want you to go to the appliances and grab enough tools for stealing, repairing, and cracking. I want to be in the same location in 2 hours. We can gather information between each other and bag up anything that might be useful," I said to him, and we went our separate ways. I went to the outdoor section and grabbed bags, wet gear, and wire. Hurriedly I gathered everything and ran to the appliances. I met Logan at the drills and literally found a perfect safe crack. He unboxed and assembled all of the pieces as fast as he could. He knew enough to finish in 20 minutes. I studied the map and found a few rooms in the back that resembled maintenance or tech rooms. Assuming that one or the other had to be a storage room. We scrambled to that part of the store. Unbelievably, it took 5 minutes to finally reach that section. I ran to the back of the hall to reach the doors that met each other. Logan and I stepped inside to find one hell of a knob. "Start drilling and let me know when it's cracked," I repeated myself. I was excited and reality started to set in. It debunked everything, as if the myth, the legend, was about to finally be true. I wanted to look at myself and envision it all piecing together. The most ironic side of this scenario would be to drive what I felt most passionate about and give myself the reward in keeping my head straight. I feel my nerves settle, and I haven't felt this good since my parents were around. Bigger they are, the harder they fall. I turned. I hit the appliances. Dipping out of sight should silence the thoughts. I'm breaking the law and breaking a bond between friends, my family. I squeezed out jelly on my sandwich, spread it all over my peanut butter, and licked the knife. It's the best invention, and chocolate can't compare. As jelly might be one of the best inventions, so is peanut butter. I feel jealous and can't help but to think of smashing more food into a paste substance. Spaghetti or ham. Everything could be made into a supper food. Mash everything into one, calling it super. I'm tripping, I tell myself. I'm at the appliances. I notice all the tools are overpriced. A bunch of similar tools that resemble the same things. I remember gunfire going through my father's skull. I look away. I grab tools. I hurried back to Logan, who had been drilling. The drill is working, and I am so excited to get what I want. No major cameras, no alarms, no artificial computer that operates under its own jurisdiction. The realization flooded over me: this might be the most relaxing job I've ever had. I imagine sitting on a beach for a second and looking at an ocean view with the moonlight and stars reflecting over top the water. I smile. "Are you done?" I ask.
"I've already broken the lock and I'm currently working on the levers. It will open in about 5 minutes or less,"
Logan said. I slip back in. Okay. I replied. Crack. The safe squeaks open slowly. The diamonds at arm's length. The crystal edges scream. I feel like a child that's finally about to receive what he's always wanted. The rock crystal reflects light, creating a prism appearance. A rainbow. Goosebumps run down my back. All my years being a thief, nothing seemed more rewarding. I notice his arm reaching outward. I try to say stop. My mouth won't spit it out. I freeze. Logan reaches for the diamond. The pressure plate lifts, and I can hear a click. A shotgun blast blows his head off. I cannot hear shit. Fuck! Fuck, 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 fuck! I say with my ears ringing. Pushing myself to get outside the room is difficult. Blood splattered the majority of the room. It knocked his head clear off. The amount of red blinded. I scramble back to grab the diamond from the corpse. I feel the blood in my bare hands. I squeeze tight enough that it hurts. I scream for the others, however, there isn't reason to. The building is too large. Doors and windows slide perfectly shut. I mutter crap underneath my breath. Television sets turn on. After a second of static, a fancy tune starts to jingle.
If you plan to steal from the best, I'll put you to rest. I'm not an enemy, only a guardian. I am dead and manage the lives of the past. With us being number one, you might be already capped. I don't hesitate in sounding pleasant, I hope you buy a present. Free up your schedule, as if you are robbed. It might sound funny, but Daisy off is on the job. With a license to kill, my friends might chill. Ice droplets are cold. Bullets off the top flew. Trapped in this location seems to be happening. Don't be mistaken, you have been taking. It's been a really nice time chasing you around, the monkeys already pooped the ground.
I intensively ran for my life. I kept in mind the direction of the meeting spot. A realization of inventiveness, off Daisy has marked its territory. Figure I would be able to run through the rows without any issues, but, as I ran down the aisles they began to turn and rotate. Instinctively, I reach out and grab the first inanimate object hoping to rope through. I don't have any luck because they're made out of stainless steel. I turn back and run in the direction of the room where the safe is secured. A toy monkey makes eye contact. We both glance and exchange a recognizable look. I ignore it without hesitation.
If you have anything else better to do, it would be a perfect time to do so.
It sputtered out. Gas shot out the back end of it. It started to fill most of the border we are consumed in. Sarin gas, better known as tear gas, spreads through the air particles. I step backward and rear-end the cage. This amount of gas would suffocate me. If I try to run through the smoke, there's a chance of muscle paralysis. I look up and think it would be better to climb. It's only about 20 to 25 feet high. Falling would be a better fate than being toxicated. The situation is at the utmost high regarding my climbing capability. I make it to the top without using too much effort. I am a thief nevertheless. I climb down the other side and grab valuables. The aisles are long and widen out in recognition of escape. Gasping with air, it had been easily more insightful to gaze around my surroundings. I only assume what kind of trouble the others are getting themselves into. I seamlessly escape my demise. Everything is in hell. Monkey gas bombs were let off in different areas in a mixture of different smoke-scattered sections as if they were off limits. I ignore the possibility of them being electronically controlled by Off Daisy. I yell again for everyone and I only hear Pablo in the distance. I stood still for a minute to try to figure out his direction. Was he trapped? I ran towards the direction I thought best. In regard to that, I came across large amounts of tables and chairs. I came into a food court of sorts and the dining area had been set up and coordinated. Open seating, to service areas, and food shops lined from left to right in all different parts. Italian food made to resemble Italy, Mexican food to resemble Mexico, Chinese food to resemble China. Every cuisine took a new direction and the courts seemed to be censored. I opened the schematics that I borrowed from Pablo and took a nice long look at it. It seemed best to go through the little Italian food court and do a loop around the shoe department. I assumed that Trek was still stationed. She wasn't dumb, that wasn't crossing my mind one time while this whole occurrence has started. Actually, it was her that I thought that might know more than I in this circumstance. It would be best to grab a gun along the way. I ran through Italy and stopped by a severed hand. It's fresh, I believe it belongs to Pablo. I look around before making any sudden moves and try to figure what might have caused this. I stop and notice a little wire hardly visible. I grab a chair and toss it in that general direction. The wire flew floss at the speed of light. It struck the chair so fast that it burst on impact and sent particles flying back to me. My stomach started to turn and I felt trapped within this cage. A large amount of adrenaline flowed through my body and made me believe I could dodge the impossible. I have to surpass this obstacle, I say aloud. I start arranging tables and chairs in one big pile in the hope of ripping it to shreds. This might either break or withhold it from passing through. I use great force to push everything towards the area of where the wire flies. I hear a ripple. The wire chopped it like a blender before snapping at the center. It was drawn back to a retreat to its holstering ends. A relief flew past me and I took off in a sprint towards the shoe department. Everything had become too intense for comprehension. I had begun to believe it might be too difficult to succeed. Ranging for different tasks, side jobs, and taking care of my intentions had caught up with me. Had I taken everything I hated for granted, I would have been victorious in changing someone's life into something desirable. I wanted to save everyone including myself, but, if it came down to the very end, I would not hesitate in escaping with my sanity. This game was set up to make someone feel lost and panicked. Anyone that could thrive for escape managed to leave with their lives, mostly. As for Logan, bad things happen to good people. I won't let these corporate control freaks have the last laugh. I'll manage the sanity of blood and walk out of these traps with my life. My body starts to spasmodically function. I start to look behind me without a reason. I keep thinking that I am being followed. I drove myself harder to make it to the shoe department. It's collapsing in on itself. I'm struggling to take deep breaths and my face starts to numb. The uncertainty drove a pacifier down my throat. Rolling jolts of impact course upward, leaving a drastic implementation. The conditioning and the intensity immaculate the probabilities. I need a drink of something hard enough to maculate my surroundings. Chairs are scattered around each end of the racks of shoes. Each shoe seems to be attached to a chair, the edges of each shoe are melted as an embroidery. The large amount of arrangements lay star-struck, music begins to play. The song rearranged each chair and found the rotation to be rather symbolic. With each passing chair a path seemed more recognizable. In its path to glory, I neared the direction toward an outdoor sector. The passage ended at the beginning and in the final stretch, a shoe bearing a loafer appeared. I realized I was insisting on the trial. The game was to stick your foot inside. I didn't want to, but there hadn't been any way around the assortment of racks and clutter of footwear. Slipping off my shoe was an acknowledgement to play. The shoe by any means seemed too tight and was probably insisted on a person's maturity of size. In the right amount of force the pain felt settling, it hurt, but was over before I realized. Discontinue. Heaven and hell shot a nail large enough to fill both ends of my foot. The chair lifted the foot off and blood drizzled from the bottom. Surprisingly a very clean operation and the pain was only stigmatic. I won and the victory had shown. Paths led each in which direction allow me to commence. Each step felt as if I was picking up the floor. I limped indefinitely with only my pride to leave its markings. The way passed and I neared enough to imply progression. The last part of the territory trickled and I was left with the last slipper. The shoe lay barren upon the glory of its rested belonging. Without hesitation, I slipped in. I clutched the side of my trousers. Blood rushes to my head and I nearly pass out. Chapter 4, Coffee and Morning. I'm running through portions of the building that I haven't seen before. The place simulates shoppers and attractions that help assist deals to be handled without care. It's set up to relax the mind for spending. The loops typically attract and lead you deeper. Most sections that were around were very large, price tags hung off everything. I had scrambled in and out of each room, it was a miniature obstacle. The small portions of material were similar to each other and grew off of what was attached. Assembly was necessary for anything that resembled being carted. The long-lasting amount of effort could be assembled, but the effort would have been undesirable. If, let's say, needed a new door, they had screws and knobs to purchase alongside anything. Everything came packaged in its own separate bag or box. I assembled my thoughts and found the pain manageable, still, immensely critical. The bleeding hasn't stopped. Each step the nail needed to come, this would be in my deepest benefactor. I managed to hide behind a haul, used by employees. I pull pliers out of the bag that I carry at all times. I sit on the ground and yank out the first nail. Slowly the red-covered nail relieves pressure as it loses the muscles that it warped around. The pain felt lesser and relief passed over me. I closed my eyes and started to feel drowsy. I rocked back up and slid out the last nail. Starting to get used to this. Thankfully, I held on to my shoes. Of course, before I had put them back on, I wrapped my feet in bandages that I grabbed soaring through the shoe department. Scrambling to the side of the wall, I managed to pull myself together before balancing myself upward. I haven't seen or heard of Pablo since the Italian restaurant. His blood wasn't reliable anymore since I had my O+, his trail died. The diamond was kept in my bag the entire time, looking if I still had it just crossed my mind. Easily unbuckling my pouch, it lay comfortably wrapped in a cloth I crumpled it into. I walked closer and closer to the ammunition section in search of a Trek. The long journey made everything feel well worth the wait. I grab a box of 9mm and reach over the counter to grab a Smith & Wesson. The size is small and capable of taking anyone out in a clear shooting range. I have never been shy of firearms, but, in my job description, I have never needed to resort to violence. Usually, a weapon meant you had to use it. The parts that I would consider myself a professional revolve around sneaking and staying hidden. Never had needed a reason to draw on anyone, until now. Police hadn't fallen into the picture and that line of duty would draw more than just one officer. Simply outnumbered and would lead into me being shot regardless. Why change it? I place the gun gently into my waistband and start to call out. Trek! This spot had been obviously organized for a grab and go. Unfortunately, the amount of weapons that were displayed were too heavy to carry around. I start to get frustrated and yell again. Trek! All of a sudden, a large amount of flyers with our faces scatter all across the floor. Our round table, as it might have seemed, was displayed as a primary target. We had been cropped into pictures of different sorts and the majority of them seemed to be fake and resembled a good time. Our faces were in action and the framework was simply just a taunt. Gathering of different sorts, our faces were looks of terror. The sick games are pissing me off, I yell out. Just realizing I was already a part of its game, the shock of the crop had disappointed me. A projector flashed an image across the wall of Trek and Pablo, it flickered from each one of the other and Tanner had been left out of the slide. Trek images flickered the mayhem her night had become. The way she staggered in the worst situations. Suddenly a large amount of shots of rubber bullets flung forcefully impaling her body. Terror flooded both of them and the mystery on how the hand came to be. Pablo seemed to be in a game of his own and drew the wrong card of some sort, as if the wrong card indicated the pull of the wire. The cut flickered past as a motion picture and the gore had fainted him on the spot. The area he fell was designed to capture and draw him away while I had been a few moments away. The pictures fade into me, it depicts if I had betrayed them both, and with each other the grief started to take its effect. In the worst case there wouldn't be consequences, just regret of life being taken from them. Light spot lift levers in the shape of animals appear. A wolf and a bear were encrusted in each of them. The pictures led into a video of me watching my reaction and words reading "The choice is yours." The benefit of saving Trek would be helpful with strategy, and Pablo would know exactly how and where to escape. The decision had been mine, but not my rule in life to decide the fate of one of my closest allies. Decide or face consequences. As those words appeared before my eyes, I hurriedly approached the switch that resembled the wolf. Words turned into a counter and the amount of time had been 20 seconds. 15 seconds had passed and my mind raced with everything that could come out of pulling the lever. 1 second dwindled down and I cranked the lever. The decision has been made. A sudden lift of the curtain and Trek shot out of a casket. She had been trapped inside without oxygen and started to gasp for air. In the next instant the other casket slammed down without it opening. I instantly dig my fingertips into the edges and try to lift. It's no use, I start to panic. Pablo is most likely trapped inside without oxygen. A second later, Trek shoves me aside and tries to lift it too, as if she would be stronger than I would be opening it. The coffin had hinges and I instinctively grabbed the Smith & Wesson from my waistband. Move, I tell Trek. She kicks herself back close to getting shot. I fired a round off and the first hinge flew off. The next shot, I missed and the third took off the final. Trek opens it as fast as she can manage.
You're all right,
she manages to say before realizing he had been unconscious. I told her she needed to do CPR and started to yank him out of the box. She starts to resuscitate him with mouth to mouth and starts pumping his chest. She pumps 10 times before giving him another breath. Then another 5 pumps and gives him another breath. As she starts to press on his chest once more, he gags. Pablo rolls over and manages to get to his feet without the use of his right hand. The wound had been surgically treated. The skin had been wrapped, but occurrences with limbs being detached from the body, modern technology burned the skin shut. The only side effect was the detachment from the limb. Regardless, the hand had been back in the food court and wasn't placed on any ice. It was lost.
Where am I?
He asked. I tell him, off DayZ. We all looked at each other. I told them why everyone was in this. Logan and I had decided to help ourselves to some extra income. We decided to sell us a diamond. We made it to the safe and drilled. The rock had been booby-trapped and the pressure plate triggered to kill Logan. I will fix this. I looked into their eyes with regret. Everyone was already too tired to honestly speak each other's opinion. Trek and Pablo just look at each other and instead started to walk. The start of us moving from where we had been after I told them what had happened. Trek starts filling my ear.
We would have never done that to you in a million years.
She sounded traumatized. I understood where she had been coming from and I nodded my head in agreement. The easiest part was thinking we weren't going to be caught, I told her. The way they stayed silent magnified the seriousness behind the mess we were in. Pablo might have said something, however, his mind was still frustrated by the idea he was handless. I saved you guys, didn't I? I took nails in both of my feet for you, I selfishly said. I won't let these manipulative assholes control our destiny, I spat.
Where is Tanner?
She asked. Hopefully having better DayZ, I said. Chapter 5, Inferno. It all motioned as everything intensified, gathering everyone seemed possible and the rummaging through the store started to feel more natural. My tongue sat comfortably atop the roof of my mouth. I swallowed loud enough for anyone standing close enough to hear. My mind felt relaxed and cooler than it had been since the beginning of all these terrifying events. The coming and going just settled in. We started to pass areas that look familiar. We are running in a circle, I tell them.
Over here,
Pablo said.
The entrance is through the toy section. We might be able to get through without anything terrible happening.
He hoped for. We followed him before reaching the main entrance. The store had been called Stuffing Pieces and color had been overwhelming. Each shelf had something different everywhere you looked. Bikes lined up and down the side of the wall and the lanes seemed to go straight through to the other side. I noticed that everything had been untouched, but seemed off a little. Tanner had been through here. I mentioned. The way he operated was so that it looked as if someone had been through the place and hadn't seemed to have been taken. He had arranged pieces and parts of toys to resemble as if they had been played with. He is notorious for doing it and tricked everyone, except me of course. We moved to the front of the store. The register had been on the counter for easy checkouts for young children to place anything they desired. A piece of tape had been stuck on top of a visible camera and a cart with Tanner laying inside of it. The cart had been designed to place toys or objects in it and now it resembled a trap. The cage had engines attached to both sides and left impressions of his body sticking out of both ends. Tanner? I say in amazement. The man looked to be conscious, but the device had been designed in the most claustrophobic way I had ever seen. We all walked around the contraption and asked if everything was okay.
Get me out of this stupid fucking thing now.
He rushed out once he noticed it had been us. The parts looked impossible to pry open and shooting the cage would endanger him. Suddenly the cages slid shut in the store and the lights had been dimmed. The toys started to activate and all electronics made a bunch of buzzing noises to make everyone panic. A lady's voice started to speak.
Each and every toy needs to be loved and cared for. The best part about purchasing a toy would be call it your own. Sometimes toys get lost or stolen. Some toys get mistreated and or damaged. We only hope that everyone stays pleased and has fun. It's in our best favor to help anyone that might have trouble picking out what they want and show it the respect and dignity it deserves.
Suddenly the voice went husky and said,
Sometimes you don't get what you want and you are left with garbage. We hope you enjoy your time with us and hope you have a good day.
The last few words die out as if she were low on batteries. The engines start to sound and the only sounds you start to hear is bones being broken and life being squeezed out of Tanner. Everyone, including me, started to cringe as the body started to ooze out like string cheese. The sounds were terrible. In an instant the whole thing had been over. The blood soaked the floor and we had lost one more of our friends. I wasn't able to do anything about this and they had made that the intention. Tanner had been alone and scared. The device had been designed to murder him on the spot. We hadn't had time to react to it besides watching him turn into tomato paste. The cage door opened on both ends of the store. There was a way out and that way was obviously our best chance in leaving this torment. My mind had never seen anyone turned into stew before. I'm a man that usually works alone and has been since the very beginning. In an instance my parents' fatal death had flashed again and compressed my chest with pain. The amount of gore was terribly too much for one evening. I had felt I belonged to a massacre and the amount of blood that had been spilled was for the sheer allowance. These people were probably the closest people that I've ever had in my life, yet they had been disappearing like hot cakes. I only have two of my partners with me and I hope they feel the same about me as I do about them. Giving them the assurance would be unnecessary, but too much is happening without our control. I begin to calm everyone as much as I can with a reassuring nod. These sick fucks will pay for all of this, I tell them.
I think that we have to reevaluate the situation. We are in way over our head and we seem to have all been through something. Would it be possible to catch our breath and reassess the situation?
Trek asked. I told her we shouldn't and that it'd be nearly time before the morning shift came in.
What time is it anyway?
She asked.
We have about an hour before 5 o'clock.
Pablo mentioned.
We could also go to the front and hang out at the checkout lines. There we can decide whether we should surrender or come up with another plan.
After looking at what happened to Tanner, I believe it's smarter to migrate away from checkout lines of any sort. We should hold up at the customer service desk. They might even have valuable supplies and information over how it would be possible to get out of this building, I say. We all managed to get to the front without any trouble, figuring they didn't want any inconvenience with customers stepping in contaminated blood splatters. The consumer service area had been a practical larger lounge. I sat on the ground and stared into my hands.
Everyone needs to take care of themselves by cleaning your cuts and wounds. Make sure nothing isn't going to get infected and change your bandages.
Before Trek had finished talking, she threw a first aid kit at my feet. The pain suddenly took over everything. Not only had they hurt, but there had been pain from relieving myself from standing. I rapidly popped some ibuprofen for the pain and used gauzes to absorb and pick out the dry blood. There had been relief and my eyes started to close. I quickly drifted into slumber. Cooling under a tree, the smell of autumn is in the air. The sweet breeze blows in my face and my bones feel a chill. It's the best feeling, it's unimaginable, and the unforgettable coziness flushes over me. Moving is out of the question and I hear the sound of alarms ringing in the background. I start to think of all of the terrible things that have happened to me throughout my life. I hadn't done everything that I wanted. All that had been desirable was freedom. The necessity of not having to rob anyone or anywhere anymore. My whole life was taken away from me and I deserved a second chance. I had an opportunity to take back everything, but nothing would have brought my parents back. The loop entwined with reality and everything would have been achievable. The beginning stages of my life were unfair. I was going to unfairly advance a way that I saw was the most reasonable. The alarming sound grew more tense and my body had started to feel a sudden shake. A cloud passed over the tree, blocking out the sun. The tree then turned into shelter. Rain poured down and wind suddenly knocked me back. I needed to move, yet, the wind power had kept me from fidgeting. Thoughts crowd my head, a storm flips me inside out. I then carry a burden that seeps through my skull. I leak and run wild with water, I start to sink. Waterlogged, I never float to the top and I no longer need to breathe. The water goes high and everything starts to go dark. I'm at the bottom of the ocean and I've never felt more alone. The alarm is the only thing that is ringing and the sound rushes through the depths of the water. I suddenly awaken in sweat. How long have I been out? I ask.
Didn't even know you had been sleeping,
Pablo said.
We are located at the center of the entrance. Unfortunately, we are blocked off by steel doors, and who knows what other security systems they have attached to him. We need to reroute away from the front and work our way around where we came. The entire building runs a circle internally. They have an open rooftop in the smack dab middle of everything,
Pablo informed. Wait, so our chance of escaping isn't over? I asked.
Hopefully there isn't anything that's in our way. With all three of us, we should be able to manage getting out of this alive,
Pablo insisted. Trek stepped in.
Aren't we at better odds in doing something unexpected? If we run in there without any clue.
Our best chance is going there. Unfortunately, we don't have anything better, and we are running out of time.
Pablo didn't let her finish.
The destination is right through the outdoor section around the corner here. The only downside of going through there is that it is more open for bags of dirt and flower pots of the sort. So, we would be in the wide open. That hadn't slowed us down last time,
he said. We can leave whenever y'all are ready, I exclaimed. The way was just how he had explained it. The path had been straight through and it had been like walking in an outdoor setting without it being outdoors. Everything was for a gardener and for anyone that did outside work. Tools, flowers, bags, mulch, and different sorts of gardener supplies. The place was open and my mind didn't have time to react to what was about to happen next. The floor started to break and everything started to move around. It had resembled an earthquake and we were completely caught off guard. I grabbed on the side of a shelf and I used it to stabilize myself as best I could. Without realizing, our position was being separated and the floor was redirecting us to different ends of the section of the store. "Everyone stay put and don't do anything," I managed to scream out before everything went still. A shift of the center of a room and a rock formed from underneath us. Its mass had filled the entire section and we began to lose sight of each other. The peak grew high enough to reach the ceiling. As I looked up to see how high it was going, fire erupted from the top. As it would seem it was a volcano, it was just a replica. Fire shot in all different ends and I heard screams on both ends of where we had been located. Each end sounded more terrible than the other. A ball of fire hit my arm and burnt right through my skin in an instant. The heat had been pressurized in metallic soft balls. Each ball touched everything around us and charred the floor and melting products all around me. The sight had been unreal and the amount of damage shot at whichever direction and seemed to be nevertheless meant for any to survive the rain. I sprint around towards Pablo and with each step I could feel the heat reaching the back of my calf. Each step I tried to pull my legs up higher. I raced to the point of finally rounding myself at the edge of the replica. I had been running for dear life and my attitude towards outfasting the fire had been beyond me. The rage had filled my head and my blood had pumped the hardest it has ever. My chest ran faster and the amount of jumps and barrel rolls I had to do just to obstacle through the amount of rummage left from the aftermath of the quake. I started to approach Pablo and he had taken cover behind a large enough rock. The fire luckily hadn't smothered him yet and it seemed to be spreading. I was still in full sprint and ran to the right side facing him to grab his right arm. Him and I managed to pull each other up in one motion without falling over each other. "Keep up," I scrambled to say. We ran in the direction of Trek and the fire started to seem to be covering the front of us. We zigged and zagged through the flame and avoided every little bit of being scorched. Then there it had been, a body lay covered in flame. The corpse from what I could tell was burnt from the first explosion of fire raining down. She had been dead and Pablo stopped to try and help her. With the instinctive reaction I managed to pull him away to escape the flame spreading all around. We drove past everything engulfed in flame. The inferno left that part of the store smelling of a stove. The invention must have designed vents hanging at the top of the volcano, letting smoke fly out the top. "Are you hurt?" I asked. Pablo didn't reply. The seriousness of our position has grown to the extent of not making it out. The rush had started to die off and my adrenaline started to settle. My arm had been bleeding, but nothing serious enough to need urgent medical attention. I asked again, "Are you hurt?" Again no reply and I started to take a few steps away and look around. Seamlessly we had surfaced to the middle. I needed not to say more and I had made my way closer towards the wall that led into the outside. I would have not made my way outside without Pablo. Leaving him wasn't an option. I couldn't have done that to him and his head probably wasn't straight. The amount of trauma had been immensely the most dramatic events taken part in his life ever. He needed me as much as I needed him. Chapter 6, Open House. My mind was settled with everything. My mother took my book out of my hands.
"You should be getting ready for our trip. All of us are about to give you a hard time if you aren't ready,"
she said. "What about Dad?" I asked. She looked at me as if I already knew the answer to that question. Dad seemed to be into keeping to himself enough for me to forget about him. He seemed to always be home and when he worked it had been typically at night. He slept, but, in most cases he seemed to be in his room.
"Dad is always on time regardless when and where. He'll end up letting us know when it's time to leave and he'll end up waiting on us. So, get all of your stuff packed and make sure your hygiene is all taken care of,"
she told me. "I'm already ready," I exclaimed. As if the timing couldn't be more perfect, Father had stepped out and asked if we were ready.
"We are."
My mother smiled. That is common in the house. My mother isn't mistreated by all means and my father loves my mother very dear. My mother stepped into the next room. I gathered all my belongings that I had packed anticipating us to leave when they said. My stuff had been the typical books and toys. My toys weren't by any means action figures, and I always kept a book on me at all times. I had traveled mostly with a book. The way stories let me travel outside of our car, and it had always been a nice solitude. I by all means have never been an outstandingly smart person. I've just wanted something easy to keep to myself most times. My toys were usually puzzles or a brain teaser. They kept me thinking and never let me zone out on something as boring as a car ride. I picked my bag up and started to walk to the next room. I heard in the distance a little of what my parents had been talking about.
You needed to do this to us now?
My mother said in a whisper.
You've been moving us around, keeping us here for a while, and moving us to keep us out of danger for years. It's been tiring some, and the effort it takes in packing, keeping our boy in check. Don't you care about his future? He's a bright young man and should have a proper way of life. If he keeps doing these things, he'll end up catching on to our situation.
My father replied with,
It's not worth worrying about. My life is practiced enough to deal with anything life tosses our way. I'll keep you out of harm's way regardless of our situation, and the area doesn't matter too much. As long as I'm with all of you, it's all that matters to me.
With the last few words he spoke, I walked into the room telling them I was ready to go.
By all means, as long as you got everything and you're not going to make us turn around again to grab another book, we should be fine,
my father replied. As we started to head for the door. Walking outside, we got into our SUV. It seemed to be spacious and I had enough room to keep my things in the back seat. I glanced off to where my parents had been loading everything in. They seemed to be talking about something, but hadn't been specific on what.
It takes time and you never seem to get past all of it. Those people don't understand what kind of reality we, as normal people, hold on to. They seem to be animals, and the type of people they are monsters.
My mother wasn't looking into my father's face while she was talking. The faint silence seemed awkward. My father understood and seemed to not want to go into greater detail about it. After they had both gotten everything loaded into the car, my mother said,
You should have at least told them where we were going.
My father looked back and pulled out of the driveway.
I have everything under control. We don't have to worry about any of that anymore.
We managed to drive down to the stop sign and hold for a quick second. The bullet flung through the windshield without it breaking. I didn't understand, but my father seemed to be in a hurry once the bullet struck my mother in the chest. We drove around the block and seamlessly managed to pull out of the shooting range.
Everything's going to be fine. It must have been a gun set up down the other street.
My mother had been crying out and blood had covered her hands and body. First the lights flashed into my eyes and my mind didn't have time to react before realizing a car had smashed right into ours. Our car flipped and totaled. My vision went blurry and I suddenly realized I was blacked out. I forced my eyes open and gunshots rang my ears with blood splattering the interior of the vehicle. My mother struggled to yell and was pulled out by the collar of her shirt. She was dragged about 5 feet away before a man said,
What a shame, the boss would make us kill a piece of ass like this.
I couldn't move and the seatbelt had tightened around my waist. Outside it had been dusk. Late enough in the evening that no one was around. No matter, these days people, even with money and no serious problems, are just worried about themselves. Neighborhoods had been nice, not exactly willing to rely on anyone or even trust them. My mother didn't seem to have much fight left.
We wouldn't be doing anyone a favor if we didn't ice her. What about the kid?
The man asked.
Leave him. The longer we take, the better the chance the boys in blue will show up. He'll probably forget this ever happened.
The man stomped on my mother's neck, a large crack buzzed. I started to scream and yell at them as my mother fell to her side. The men started to walk closer. Sirens started to sound in the background and then turned and got back into the vehicle. The car hadn't seemed to be totaled and drove just fine. I managed to unfasten my seatbelt before the cops showed up and I grabbed my stuff and walked home. Later the cops walked in and took me to the hospital. There had been an adoption agency, but I ran away after a week. I started stealing to eat. I started to steal from homes, business, companies, and more that steered me wrong. I was determined and I started to grow a knack for taking things that hadn't belonged to me. I started to get good, and the more time I put into it, the bigger the reward. I had finally become a full-time thief. A couple of years after running around, I met Trek and Pablo in a heist. We were all stealing from a cola company that had been doing very good for themselves. We started robbing together and eventually became good friends. Tanner and Logan eventually joined the picture, but hadn't been as close together as Trek and Pablo. I looked over and saw Pablo still motionless. We needed to hurry and get out before anything else happened. I felt it in my bag and the diamond was still there. We have our chance of getting out of this. We'll be good once we're out. I have the diamond and the payout will keep us going for a while. I want you to be okay, you know. Pablo didn't say anything and I started to walk away.
Isn't everything about that? Everything has been about that. We are running around the fucking store and trying to get out with our lives and the diamond.
He looked at his hand and calmed down a little.
I want to leave and never see you again. I need out. I need out. I need out.
The way he said it showed exactly how tired he was. I didn't need him to start anything with me. I wanted out as much as he did at this point, but he was right. I did them wrong. It was all about the money and all I need to do is leave. Chapter 7, Curtains Fall. Pablo and I held onto each other as we walked. He had sprained his ankle and I just needed him to move. I wasn't going to leave him and I wasn't going to let him get caught. The door was sliding and had not been locked down. As we approached it, the slide opened and the fresh air smelled familiar. I missed it and my body released a buzz of stress once we caught a chill of the wind. The park had been opened and it represented a garden. There had been trees and different shrubs of different sorts. We haven't come in this unprepared. A while ago we realized it would be easier to know how to rock climb. I bring around harnesses, carabiners, belay devices, and cams. I keep plenty of rope on me and we're pretty flexible when climbing. I'll just have to go first and plug the bolts and attach cams. If the walls are tight enough, I should be able to pull Pablo up alongside after. The walls have been designed to represent a jungle, so it has been conveniently nice for us. My heart took in everything and I thought hopefully Off Day Z don't fuck this up for us. The thought jinxed us. A jumbotron flashes on and a man wearing a mask. His white mask and his voice had been muffled. He told us congratulations and that our chances of escaping had statistically gone in our favor.
We are holding you for the crimes you are, did, and going to happen. We rid the filth off the face of this planet. We show no mercy and our system keeps order. I'm sorry to tell you that you have finally come to the last stand between us and your escape. Even with your odds of escape, we will find it in our best interest to kill you here and now on the spot.
With the sudden click, the jumbotron bombs and guns started to ring in every which direction. The war suddenly channeled through my body. I felt faint and jumped on Pablo. Shots and explosions ran over top of us and the best thing we could have done was stand still. We both started to crawl and we sat behind a bush. The bullets and bombs suddenly stopped. We took our breath and Pablo had started to cry. I can't take any more of this shit. We have been running in every direction and no matter what we do they seem to always be ahead of us. There hadn't been anything we could do. We suddenly became helpless and this had been our death sentence. The end of our time was now. I took a long look at Pablo. I told you we'll get out of this and that is exactly what we're going to do. If we can make this out alive, we'll have to distract them entirely. I'm not trying to put pressure on you, but I need you to run. I pointed at the exit. I'm going to need you to run in that direction and cause a distraction. I'll have to start climbing and I'll clip everything into place so we can get out of this. With the last bit of strength he jumped out of his spot where he was sitting. He took off in a sprint. The sprint was fast, except the run had a limp with it. Gunfire started to ring and I didn't hesitate to bolt towards the wall. I smacked in the wall as if purposely running into it. I grab each and every ledge and smack bolt hangers into the wall, and the higher I went made this all seem possible. The top wasn't far and I had fallen faint. I blacked out a few times. When I reached the top I had only hoped Pablo was still alive. I had zipped down and smoothly touched the ground. I had unhinged my harness and readied one for Pablo. The bullets had stopped and I slipped under a shrub. I looked silently and whispered for Pablo. I hadn't gotten a reply. Suddenly I heard another chain of bullets fly as if they had only been aiming. One by one I kept my eyes peeled. I realized Pablo had been running past me and already jumped into his harness without my direction. We both attached ourselves to the line and I started to climb first. Bullets smacked against the wall and hit in whichever direction they had been fired off in. Nothing had managed to reach us. The trees and the brush kept us well hidden. As long as we climbed slowly on the side we would be fine. Of course pulling Pablo up alongside had been difficult. Luckily he had a decent amount of upper muscle strength and hadn't been dead weight. Then the unthinkable struck and a bullet ripped Pablo's head off. The weight started to sink and it had been difficult to hold him. Shit, I cut his line and I saw his body fall in the green below. I suddenly struggled and rushed as fast as I could to the top. Bullets hit my arm and leg. I finally stopped. My muscles had finally locked up. And I dangled there. I slipped my knife out of my pocket and cut the wire holding me on the side of the wall. Pablo's body broke my fall. I heard a crunch when I hit the ground. I rolled off and kept my head down. I held back and I managed to hear the jumbotron click on again. The screen showed the man walk towards a desk in the back of the room and sat down on the chair. He took off his mask. His face wasn't recognizable and it was a very defined face. He seemed to be older, but stress hadn't taken its toll. He had dark hair with blue eyes. He smiled and his muffled voice was more distinguishable.
Our industry is developed to show this world that no one isn't free and the power belongs to anyone that can afford it. We are letting you go, and not because of sympathy, but because our goal in life is to strip you of your crime and give you an entire new meaning. We can only say that we haven't been successful.
As he spoke, different videos of my crew had been recorded of them dying.
We hope you have learned your lesson and the path that you taken will determine whether we meet again or not. I am sure that you made the right decision.
The video blacked out and everything opened up. Chapter 8, Epilogue. I have been holding everything for a long time and I have finally done it. The actor that I attacked spilled information to me. The man in the video was in a penthouse in the city and I impersonated a clerk. I burst in his door with my silencer, firing a round into his shoulders. He fell to the ground and I grabbed him by his throat. I hit him in his face as hard as I could. Tell me everything you know about Off Day Z. He said that he was hired by them through the phone, but he talked to another before doing the job. He took out his notes from his jacket and handed it to me. I snapped his neck without asking any more. The man that had been an associate for Off Day Z, and I had staked him out for over a week. The headquarters had been located outside of the city. It seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. The man that I had staked out was in the back of my car beaten nonsensical. I had taken all his badges and associate accesses. I took out a fully automatic M4 carbine with a laser sight, silencer and extended clip, stashed it in my bag. I had dressed the part for walking into the building. Walking in was nice and modern. There had been a metal detector and guards in the front. I split open my coat and pulled out a gun, firing shots into the 3 men standing at the checkpoint. I pull out the M4 from my bag and use the badge to gain access to the elevator. I hit the lowest level, it being underground. I took my gun out and settled in for the door to open. The door clicked open and each room had been set up as a test room with different little replica rooms with machines to either kill or rebuke its victim. People had been set up in every little location and I roared with my gun, cutting into the crowd of white cloaks. Bloodshed slushed and the bodies piled onto each other. The gun felt smooth and I was on a mission. I stepped over the bodies and each and every person on the floor I shot. I burst into a room with cameras and all sorts of monitors and people had been hiding under the desk. They screamed and cried for mercy. The establishment had been corporate. The establishment was set up as a chain of command and one person after another. The murders that had killed my friends had been normal people. People working for a week-to-week paycheck. I drop a charge onto the table and set a timer. I shoot a few more guards that spill out of the elevator. I rode up the elevator. The elevator rattled a little as the bomb went off below me. It had been about a year since the events that had passed. They seemed to be intense. My body still had aches and the loss of my friends dug deep. I should be able to make someone suffer for this. I wouldn't know if it could be possible. I had sent a message and I would have probably got on their shit list for it. I stepped out of the building and then walked to the back of my car. I pulled the man out and crushed his skull with my foot. I jumped into my car and peeled off. The executed revenge. It hadn't been enough. The blood was finally given back to me that I had lost. My destiny wasn't set in stone, it had been formed. Just like everything man-made, it sits in a landfill and decomposes. I figured I would be in some type of trouble for the crimes that I had just committed. Only thing I would be able to do would be to set off on a different life and give it reasons. I squeeze my fist into a ball and don't let go of what life I have remaining.
Thank you for listening.